The council chamber of Desser Prime was built to make visitors feel small. Giant stone pillars rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was polished black marble that reflected the cold light of floating orbs. At the far end of the room, 7 Valkyrie counselors sat on raised thrones, looking down at anyone who dared to stand before them. Commander Jake Morrison had seen a lot of things in his 20 years of service. He had fought pirates in the Outer Rim. He had walked through the ruins of colony ships. He had buried friends on worlds whose names most people would never know. But he had never felt the kind of cold arrogance that filled this room. He stood 3 steps behind Ambassador Linda Cho, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. It was not a threat. It was habit. Beside him, Lieutenant Nina Vance kept her eyes moving, watching every Valkyrie guard in the chamber. There were 12 of them. She had counted twice. Ambassador Cho stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She had spent 30 years building bridges between Earth and the galaxy. Today, she knew that bridge was about to burn. High Counselor Drex then leaned forward on his throne. He was massive, even for a Valkyrie. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his yellow eyes held the kind of contempt that came from centuries of unchallenged power. "You have heard our terms," Drex then said. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. 3 of your border colonies will be transferred to the Valkyrie Empire. Your people will be relocated. Your structures will be repurposed. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. Ambassador Cho did not flinch. She had expected this. The Valkyrie had been expanding for 10,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. To them, humanity was just another young species to be pushed aside. "High Counselor," Cho said, her voice steady and clear, "the United Earth Federation has considered your terms. We must respectfully decline." Silence filled the chamber. The Valkyrie guards shifted uneasily. The counselors exchanged glances of disbelief. Drexton's eyes narrowed. "Decline?" "Yes," Cho said. "Those colonies are home to over 2 million human citizens. They have built lives there. Families, communities. We will not abandon them." A low rumble came from Drexton's throat. It might have been a laugh. "Ambassador, I do not think you understand your position. The Valkyrie Empire has existed for 10,000 years. We have crushed species far older and stronger than yours. Your federation is barely 3 centuries old. You are infants stumbling through the stars. Age does not determine worth, High Counselor," Cho replied. "And strength is not measured only in years." Drex then rose from his throne. He was nearly 3 meters tall, towering over the humans below. "You dare to lecture me? Your species still remembers crawling in the mud of your homeworld. You have no fleet that can match ours. You have no weapons that can threaten us. You are nothing." Commander Morrison felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his face calm. He had learned long ago that anger was a tool, not a master. You used it when you needed it. Right now, he needed patience. Ambassador Cho remained unmoved. "We do not wish for conflict, High Counselor, but we will not surrender our people. If there is another way to resolve this dispute, we are willing to discuss it." "There is no other way," Drexton growled. "You will submit, or you will be crushed. Those are your only choices." "Then we choose neither," Cho said simply. Drexton stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the other counselors. "Let it be recorded. The United Earth Federation has rejected the generous offer of the Valkyrie Empire. They have chosen defiance." He looked back at Cho, his yellow eyes burning with cold fire. "As of this moment, a state of war exists between our peoples. You have brought this upon yourselves." The words hung in the air like poison. War, the word that every diplomat feared. The word that meant death and suffering on a scale most people could not imagine. Ambassador Cho simply nodded. I will inform my government. I hope that one day you will reconsider. There will be nothing left to reconsider, Drexton said. Your colonies will fall. Your fleets will burn. Your homeworld will kneel. This is the fate of all who defy the Valkyrie. The human delegation turned to leave. The guards watched them with hungry eyes, eager for the war that had just been declared. As Morrison reached the door, Drexton called out one last time. Human, Commander, do your people even understand what war means? Real war? Against an empire that has broken worlds? Morrison stopped. He turned slowly to face the High Counselor. For a moment, the two soldiers looked at each other across the vast chamber. One ancient and proud. One young and calm. High Counselor, Morrison said quietly, you should have done your research. Drexton frowned. What do you mean? Morrison did not answer. He simply turned and walked out the door, following the ambassador into the corridor beyond. Behind them, the Valkyrie laughed. The sound echoed off the stone walls and faded into silence. They had declared war on a species they considered primitive, weak, insignificant. They had no idea what they had just awakened. As the human shuttle lifted off from Desert Prime, Lieutenant Vance looked at Morrison. Sir, do you think they have any idea what is coming? Morrison watched the alien world shrink below them. Somewhere down there, an empire was celebrating what they thought would be an easy victory. No, he said. They have no idea. And by the time they figure it out, it will be too late. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere and entered the cold darkness of space. Behind them, a war had begun. A war that would change the galaxy forever. Ambassador Cho sat in silence, her eyes closed. She had done everything she could to prevent this. Now, all she could do was hope that humanity would survive what was coming. But deep down, in a place she rarely acknowledged, she knew something the Valkyrie did not. Humanity did not just survive. Humanity endured. Humanity adapted. Humanity fought. And humanity won. The Valkyrie would learn this lesson soon enough. They would learn it in fire and blood and tears. They would learn it in the wreckage of their fleets and the ashes of their pride. They had declared war on the deadliest species in the galaxy. Now they would discover why. Harmony Point was the largest trading station in the neutral zone. It floated in the darkness between empires, a place where enemies could meet without weapons and rivals could trade without fear. Thousands of species passed through its corridors every day, buying and selling, talking and listening. Commander Threx of the Valkyrie Imperial Fleet walked through the main trading hall with his head held high. He was young for a commander, barely 200 years old, but he had earned his rank through victory. He had crushed rebellions on 3 worlds. He had broken the spine of the Mirathi resistance. He was a warrior of the Empire, and he wore his pride like armor. Today, he had come to Harmony Point with a simple mission. The war against humanity had begun 3 days ago. High Counselor Drexton wanted allies. He wanted the other species of the galaxy to stand with the Valkyrie against this new threat. Threx expected it to be easy. Who would refuse the Valkyrie Empire? He found his first target in a quiet corner of the station. Trademaster Yulin of the Serati Collective sat at a low table, drinking something blue and steaming. The Serati were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Their empire had risen and fallen 3 times before the Valkyrie even existed. Now they were merchants and scholars, content to watch the younger races struggle for power. Yulin looked up as Threx approached. The old Serati was small and wrinkled, with pale skin and eyes that had seen too much history. Commander Threx, I wondered when one of your kind would arrive. Threx sat down without being invited. Trademaster, you have heard about the war. Everyone has heard about the war, Yulin said. The Valkyrie have decided to crush another young species. How exciting! Threx ignored the sarcasm. The High Council requests the support of the Sorati Collective. Trade sanctions against humanity. Denial of port access. Nothing military. Just economic pressure. Yulin took a long sip of his drink. No. Threx blinked. No? No, Yulin repeated. The Sorati will not involve themselves in your war. And if you are wise, Commander, you will find a way to end this conflict before it truly begins. End it? Threx laughed. The war has barely started. In 6 months, humanity will be a memory. Yulin set down his cup and looked at Threx with something that might have been pity. You know nothing about humans, do you? Before Threx can answer, another voice joined the conversation. He knows what the Valkyrie intelligence reports tell him, which is almost nothing. Threx turned to see a figure approaching the table. It was Zella of the Mirren, an insectoid diplomat with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the station lights like jewels. The Mirren were known throughout the galaxy as information gatherers. They studied everything. They forgot nothing. Zella settled into a chair, her wings folding neatly against her back. I have been waiting for this moment, Commander. The moment when the Valkyrie realize what they have done. Threx felt his scales flush with anger. What we have done is assert our rightful dominance. Humanity refused to surrender 3 worthless colonies. They brought this war upon themselves. Worthless to you, perhaps, Zella said. But humans do not abandon their own. It is one of their defining traits. Loyalty to weakness is still weakness, Threx said. Yulin shook his head slowly. You truly do not understand. Zella, show him. The Mirren diplomat reached into her robes and pulled out a small projector. She placed it on the table and activated it. A holographic display flickered to life, showing images and video that made Threx lean forward despite himself. This is Earth, Zella said. The human homeworld. It is a death world, Commander. 70% of the surface is covered in water that will kill you if you drink it without processing. The atmosphere carries diseases that mutate constantly. The planet experiences earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, and floods. Predators fill every environment. And the temperature varies so wildly that humans had to evolve the ability to survive in both burning heat and freezing cold. Threx watched the images scroll past. Storms that swallowed cities. Mountains that spewed fire. Oceans filled with creatures that had too many teeth. Most species would have died on such a world, Yulin said quietly. Humans did not just survive. They conquered it. Zella changed the display. Now it showed human history. Wars. Endless wars. Threx watched armies clash across fields, cities burn. Weapons evolved from sticks and stones to devices that could split atoms. In their short history, Zella continued, humans have fought thousands of wars against each other. They have survived plagues that killed half their population. They have survived ice ages that covered their world in frozen death. They have survived asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, and weapons that could have destroyed their entire civilization. And they kept going, Yulin added. Every time they were knocked down, they got back up. Every time they faced extinction, they found a way to survive. That is what you are fighting, Commander. Not a young species. A species that has been fighting for survival since the moment it existed. Threx stared at the display. He watched humans charge into battle against impossible odds. He watched them rebuild cities from rubble. He watched them reach into the sky and pull themselves into space through sheer determination. A new voice spoke from behind him. Impressive, is it not? Threx turned to see a human standing nearby. The man was middle-aged, with weathered skin and calm gray eyes. He wore the simple clothes of a freighter captain. Captain Ben Howard, the human said, offering a slight nod. I could not help but overhear your conversation. A human, Threx said, rising to his feet. You should be fleeing, not standing here. Howard smiled. It was not a threatening smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen worse than an angry Valkyrie commander. I have been flying these trade routes for 20 years, Commander. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species that thought themselves invincible crumble to dust. And I have learned one thing. What is that? Threx demanded. Never fight someone who has nothing to lose and everything to prove. Howard looked at the holographic display, still showing human history. We have been fighting since we could stand upright. Fighting the world. Fighting each other. Fighting death itself. You think your empire is strong because it has lasted 10,000 years. But strength is not about how long you last. It is about how hard you fight when everything is against you. Threx felt something cold settle in his stomach. He pushed it down. Pretty words from a species that will soon be extinct. He turned and walked away, leaving the others behind. He had heard enough. He would find allies elsewhere. The Valkyrie would crush humanity, just as they had crushed every other species that defied them. But as he walked through the corridors of Harmony Point, he could not shake the images from his mind. The wars, the survival, the endless, relentless refusal to die. Behind him, Trademaster Yulin watched him go. He does not believe us. No, Zella agreed. He does not. But he will. They all will. Howard finished his drink and stood up. I should get back to my ship. Something tells me the trade routes are about to get very interesting. Yulin looked at the human captain with ancient, knowing eyes. Captain Howard. A word of advice. Yes? Win quickly. The galaxy is watching. And the galaxy respects only strength. Howard nodded slowly. We intend to, Trademaster. We intend to. He walked away, leaving the two aliens alone with their thoughts and their warnings. The war had begun, and the warnings had been given. Now, all that remained was to see if anyone would listen. The Valkyrie fleet dropped out of hyperspace above New Helena like a storm of steel and fire. 47 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could turn cities to ash. Fleet Commander Vorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the small blue-green world grow larger in the view screen. Scan the system, he ordered. Find their defenses. His tactical officer worked quickly. A moment later, the results appeared on screen. Commander, the humans have 16 ships in orbit. Most are light cruisers. Their largest vessel is a single battle cruiser. They are outnumbered nearly 3-1. Vorath allowed himself a smile. As expected. Open a channel. The communication officer nodded. Channel open, Commander. Human defenders, Vorath said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of conquest. This is Fleet Commander Vorath of the Valkyrie Imperial Navy. You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender your colony and your lives will be spared. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have 1 hour to decide. He closed the channel and settled back into his command chair. They will surrender. They always do. 43 minutes later, his communication officer spoke again. Commander, we are receiving a response from the human fleet. Put it through. A woman's face appeared on the view screen. She was older, with short gray hair and eyes that held no fear. Her uniform bore the insignia of an admiral. Fleet Commander Vorath, she said. This is Admiral Patricia Cole of the United Earth Federation Navy. I have received your offer of surrender, and I have a response. Go ahead, Vorath said, curious despite himself. No, Vorath blinked. No, no, Admiral Cole repeated. We will not surrender. Not today. Not ever. If you want New Helena, you will have to take it. And I promise you, It will cost you more than you can imagine." The channel went dead. Varus stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he turned to his tactical officer. "All ships, attack formation. Begin the assault." The battle began. Admiral Cole had known from the start that she could not win a straight fight. The Valkyrie had more ships, more guns, more everything. A direct confrontation would be suicide. So she did not fight directly. Her ships scattered the moment the Valkyrie advanced. They split into small groups, darting between asteroids and debris fields, using the system's geography as a weapon. They struck at the edges of the Valkyrie formation, hitting supply ships and communication relays, then vanishing before the heavier warships could respond. The Valkyrie had never faced tactics like this. They were used to enemies who stood and fought, who met them in honorable battle and died with dignity. The humans refused to play that game. "They are running," Voreth growled as another group of human ships disappeared behind a moon. "Cowards." But even as he spoke, another explosion rocked his fleet. A Valkyrie destroyer had strayed too close to an asteroid field. Human ships had been waiting inside, hidden in the shadows. They had struck fast and hard, crippling the destroyer before escaping into the darkness. "Commander," his tactical officer said, his voice tight with frustration, "we have lost 4 ships. The humans have lost 2. Voreth's claws dug into his command chair. 4 ships. 4 ships lost to a force 1/3 their size. It was impossible. It was insulting. "Push forward," he ordered. "Ignore their tricks. Take the planet." The Valkyrie fleet descended toward New Helena. The human ships fell back, still harassing, still striking, but unable to stop the overwhelming force bearing down on their world. On the surface, Sergeant Danny Reyes watched the sky burn. He stood on a hillside overlooking the main colony city, surrounded by 200 soldiers and 3,000 civilian volunteers. They had been preparing for this moment since the war began. Every street had been turned into a kill zone. Every building had been fortified. Every man, woman, and child old enough to hold a weapon had been trained to use one. Mayor Ellen Banks had refused to evacuate. "This is our home," she had said. "We built it with our hands. We will defend it with our lives." Now, as the first Valkyrie landing craft broke through the clouds, Reyes raised his rifle and looked at his people. They were not soldiers. They were farmers and teachers and engineers. But in their eyes, he saw something that made him proud to stand beside them. He saw determination. "Remember what I told you," he called out. "We do not fight fair. We fight to win. Make them pay for every inch of ground. Make them bleed for every building. And when they think they have beaten us, we hit them again." The Valkyrie landed expecting easy conquest. They found a nightmare instead. The streets of New Helena became death traps. Buildings that looked empty exploded when Valkyrie troops entered. Roads that seemed clear were filled with hidden trenches and covered positions. Human fighters appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and disappeared before the Valkyrie could organize a response. Reyes led his people through the chaos, always moving, always striking. He had studied every war in human history, from ancient times to the modern age. He knew that a smaller force could defeat a larger one. If they refused to fight on the enemy's terms, the Valkyrie grew frustrated. They were warriors of an ancient empire. They had conquered worlds with ease. But these humans refused to behave like proper enemies. They did not stand and fight. They did not surrender when wounded. They kept coming, kept fighting, kept dying with weapons in their hands. One Valkyrie soldier reported seeing a human continue fighting with 3 bullets in his chest. Another reported a group of humans charging a fortified position with nothing but knives, screaming as they came. A third reported humans setting themselves on fire to take out enemy vehicles, fleet, Commander Vorath finally landed his troops in overwhelming numbers. Slowly, brutally, they pushed the humans back. Street by street. Building by building. The fighting lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, the Valkyrie took New Helena. But it was not a victory. Vorath stood in the ruins of the colony's main square, surrounded by the bodies of his soldiers. He had lost nearly 8,000 troops, taking a single planet. His fleet had lost 11 ships. And even now, with the colony officially conquered, human insurgents were striking from the shadows, killing his soldiers and vanishing into the wilderness. "Commander," his aide said quietly, "High Counselor Drex Thin is requesting a report on our progress." Vorath looked at the burning city around him. He thought about the humans who had fought like demons, who had died rather than surrender, who were still fighting even now. "Tell the High Counselor," he said slowly, "that we have taken the planet. And our losses?" Vorath was silent for a long moment. "Tell him that the humans are not what we expected. Tell him that this war will not be easy. Tell him that we have made a terrible mistake." His aide stared at him. "Commander?" Vorath turned and walked back toward his shuttle. "Just tell him. And pray that he listens. Because if he does not, we are all going to die on worlds just like this one." Behind him, somewhere in the ruins, a human sniper lined up another shot. The war had only just begun. 2 months into the war, the galaxy began to realize that something had gone terribly wrong for the Valkyrie Empire. The early reports had been confident. The mighty Valkyrie fleet had struck the human colonies. Victory was expected within weeks. The young species would be crushed, their worlds absorbed, their people scattered. It was the way of things. It was how the Valkyrie had built their empire over 10,000 years. But the weeks passed, and victory did not come. General Marcus Webb stood in the command center of the human flagship, Endurance, watching holographic displays that showed the current state of the war. 2 months ago, those displays had been mostly red, showing Valkyrie territory pressing against human space. Now, streaks of blue were cutting deep into the red. Human forces were advancing on multiple fronts. "Report," Webb said. His chief of staff, Colonel Amy Torres, stepped forward. "General, Task Force 7 has completed their mission in the Catherine system. The Valkyrie supply depot has been destroyed. Enemy forces in the sector are now cut off from resupply. Task Force 3? They hit the communication relay at Vorshan Station 6 hours ago. Valkyrie fleet coordination in the entire northern sector has been disrupted. Their ships are operating blind." Webb nodded slowly. This was the strategy he had designed from the beginning. Do not fight the Valkyrie where they are strong. Hit them where they are weak. Break their supply lines. Blind their communications. Turn their size into a weakness instead of a strength. It was working. On Earth, Dr. Hannah Price stood in her laboratory, surrounded by screens showing data that would have seemed impossible 2 months ago. Her team had been given a simple task: study the Valkyrie technology captured in the early battles. Understand it. Improve it. They had done more than that. "The new shield generators are ready for deployment," her assistant said, handing her a tablet. "They are 40% more efficient than the Valkyrie originals. And the weapon systems? Complete. We adapted their plasma technology and combined it with our own electromagnetic systems. The result is a hybrid weapon that hits harder and cycles faster than anything the Valkyrie have." Price allowed herself a small smile. The Valkyrie had spent thousands of years developing their technology. Humans had studied it for weeks and found ways to make it better. That was what humans did. They learned. They adapted. They improved across the galaxy. Ambassador Linda Cho was fighting a different kind of war. She sat in a conference room on a neutral station, facing representatives from a dozen species. These were the Valkyrie's former allies and trading partners. They had watched the war with growing concern, uncertain which side to support. Cho had come to help them decide. "You have seen the footage from New Helena," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You have seen what the Valkyrie did to our civilians. The bombings, the executions, the destruction of hospitals and schools." The alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. They had indeed seen the footage. It had been broadcast across the galaxy by human agents, showing the truth of Valkyrie conquest. "The Valkyrie told you this would be an easy war," Cho continued. "They told you humanity would fall in weeks. It has been 2 months. Our colonies still stand. Our fleets still fight. And now, our forces are pushing into Valkyrie space." A Serati merchant leaned forward. "What do you want from us, Ambassador?" "Nothing military. We are not asking you to fight our war. We are simply asking you to stop supporting the Valkyrie. End your trade agreements. Close your ports to their ships. Let them fight this war alone." The representatives looked at each other. They had grown comfortable under Valkyrie dominance, accepting the Empire's protection in exchange for obedience. But the war had changed things. The Valkyrie were losing, and nobody wanted to be on the losing side. One by one, they agreed. On Nesser Prime, High Counselor Drexton received the news with growing fury. "The Marathi have ended their trade agreement," his advisor reported. "The Serati Collective has closed their ports. The Kethran Alliance has declared neutrality and will no longer supply our fleets." Drexton slammed his fist against his throne. "Cowards. All of them. Do they not see that we will crush these humans? Do they not understand our power?" "High Counselor," another advisor said carefully, "our losses have been significant. We have lost 37 ships and over 40,000 soldiers. The humans continue to resist on every front, and our own intelligence reports suggest that their main fleet is massing for a counteroffensive." "Then we will destroy their fleet," Drexton growled. "We will send everything we have. We will end this war once and for all." But even as he spoke, the reports continued to come in. Human forces had struck a military base in the Varth system. Human infiltrators had sabotaged a weapons factory on Nesser Minor. Human ships had appeared in systems that should have been secure, striking hard and vanishing before Valkyrie forces could respond. The humans were not fighting like a young species desperate to survive. They were fighting like a predator that had found wounded prey. General Webb launched his counteroffensive on the 63rd day of the war. 300 human ships, built in shipyards that had worked around the clock since the war began, emerged from hyperspace in the heart of Valkyrie territory. They were crewed by soldiers who had trained for this moment, armed with weapons that represented the best of human ingenuity. The Valkyrie fleet that rose to meet them expected another guerrilla engagement. Hit and run. Strike and fade. That was how humans fought. Not today. Admiral Patricia Cole, her wounds from the Battle of New Helena still healing, commanded the assault. She stood on the bridge of her new flagship, watching the enemy fleet assemble. "All ships," she said, her voice carrying across the fleet. "This is Admiral Cole. For 2 months we have fought in the shadows. We have struck from the darkness. We have shown the Valkyrie that we will not surrender, will not break, will not give up." She paused, looking at the holographic display showing the enemy fleet. 200 Valkyrie warships, the largest force they had assembled since the war began. "Today, we fight in the light. Today, we show them what happens when humanity stops running and starts hunting. All ships, attack." The Battle of Dessergate lasted for 6 hours. It was the largest naval engagement in the history of either species. Human ships fought with a fury that stunned the Valkyrie commanders. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought until their ships were burning wreckage. And then they fought some more. When it was over, the Valkyrie fleet had been shattered. 143 of their ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors fled toward Desert Prime, carrying tales of human savagery that spread fear through the Empire. The humans had lost 72 ships, but they had won. On Desert Prime, Drexton received the news in silence. His advisors stood around him, waiting for orders, waiting for rage, waiting for something. Finally, he spoke. "They are coming, are they not?" His senior advisor nodded slowly. "Yes, High Counselor. Human forces have entered our home system. They will reach Desert Prime within 3 days." Drexton looked at the floor. 10,000 years. 10,000 years of conquest and glory. And now, an empire that had broken worlds was being broken by a species barely 3 centuries old. How? He whispered. How is this possible? Nobody answered. Nobody knew. Outside, in the darkness of space, human ships gathered like wolves around a dying animal. The end was coming. The sky above Desert Prime was filled with human ships. Admiral Patricia Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking down at the world that had started this war. 3 months ago, the Valkyrie had declared humanity a primitive species worthy only of conquest. Now, their homeworld was surrounded, their fleets were broken, and their empire was crumbling. Admiral, her communications officer, said, "We are receiving a transmission from the surface. High Counselor Drexton is requesting to discuss terms." Cole felt something shift in her chest. After everything that had happened, after all the death and destruction, it was finally ending. "Tell him we will send a delegation to the council chamber." The same chamber where this war began. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Desert Prime under heavy escort. Inside sat Ambassador Linda Cho, Commander Jake Morrison, and a small team of diplomats and guards. They were the same people who had stood in this council chamber 3 months ago. Receiving the declaration of war. Now they were returning to end it. The council chamber looked different than Morrison remembered. The arrogant lighting had been dimmed. The giant pillars cast long shadows. The 7 thrones at the far end of the room were mostly empty. Only one figure remained, sitting alone in the darkness. High Counselor Drexton looked older. His scales had lost their luster. His yellow eyes, once burning with contempt, were dull and tired. He watched the human delegation approach with the look of someone who had seen everything he believed in turn to dust. "Ambassador Cho," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Commander Morrison, you have returned." "We have, High Counselor," Cho replied. She stopped at the same spot where she had stood 3 months ago. The same distance, the same position, but everything else had changed. "You have come for our surrender," Drexton said. It was not a question. "We have come for peace," Cho said. "The war is over. Your fleets have been defeated. Your allies have abandoned you. Your outer colonies have already begun negotiating separate treaties. There is nothing left to fight for." Drexton was silent for a long moment. Above them, through the glass ceiling, human ships could be seen moving against the stars. A constant reminder of how completely the balance of power had shifted. "What are your terms?" He finally asked. Cho pulled out a small data pad and began to read. "Full withdrawal from all human territory. Reparations for the damage done to New Helena and our other colonies. Release of all human prisoners. A non-aggression treaty lasting 100 years. And a formal apology to the families of those killed in this war." Drexton listened to each term. His claws gripped the arms of his throne, but he did not interrupt. When Cho finished, he looked at her with something that might have been confusion. "That is all? You do not demand territory. You do not demand the dissolution of our government? You do not seek to conquer us as we sought to conquer you?" "No," Cho said simply. "We are not you. The words hung in the air. Morrison watched Drexton process them, watched the ancient Velkari struggle to understand a species that could win a war and not seek to destroy its enemy. Why? Drexton asked. You could take everything from us. You have the power. You have the right of conquest. Why show mercy? Morrison stepped forward. He had been silent since entering the chamber, but now he felt compelled to speak. High Counselor, do you remember what I said to you the day this war began? I told you that you should have done your research. Drexton nodded slowly. I remember, and I did not understand what you meant. I still do not. Morrison looked around the chamber at the fallen glory of an empire that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. Your empire conquered species who surrendered. You broke them because they gave up. They accepted defeat because they had never learned how to keep fighting. He turned back to face the High Counselor. Humans are different. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have wiped us out. We fought wars that killed millions of our own people, and we rebuilt from the ashes. We reached for the stars not because it was easy, but because it was the hardest thing we could imagine doing. Morrison's voice grew quiet but intense. You saw our short lives and thought us weak, but our short lives taught us to fight for every moment. You saw our small territory and thought us insignificant, but our small territory taught us to value what we have. You thought you were conquering primitives. You were fighting the survivors of a death world. Drexton stared at him. And the mercy? Why spare us when you could crush us? Because victory is not about destruction, Morrison said. It is about survival. We have survived. Our people are safe. Our worlds are free. That is enough. We do not need to become monsters to defeat them. Ambassador Cho stepped forward again. High Counselor, you asked how a species so young could defeat an empire so ancient. Here is your answer. Age does not determine strength. Size does not determine power. The deadliest species in the galaxy is not the one with the biggest fleet or the longest history. It is the one that never stops fighting, never stops adapting, never stops surviving. She placed the datapad on the floor before his throne. Sign the treaty. End this war. And perhaps, in time, you will come to understand what we already know. The universe is vast and dangerous. Species that work together survive. Species that fight each other fade into dust. Drexton looked at the datapad for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose from his throne. He was still massive, still physically imposing, but the arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. I sign your treaty, he said quietly, and I accept your peace. But I would ask one thing of you, Ambassador. What is that? Remember this moment. Remember what you have done here today. Because you have not just won a war. You have announced yourselves to the galaxy. Every species is now watching. Every empire is now wondering. And they will all ask the same question. What question? Drexton looked at her with ancient, tired eyes. What else are humans capable of? Ambassador Cho met his gaze without flinching. That, High Counselor, is a question we are still discovering the answer to ourselves. The treaty was signed that day. The war ended. Human forces withdrew from Velkari space, taking their dead and their wounded, but leaving nothing else behind. Across the galaxy, news broadcasts updated their records. Next to the entry for humanity, new warnings were added to the Galactic database. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not threaten. Months later, Trademaster Yuland sat in his usual spot on Harmony Point, watching ships come and go. A human freighter passed by his window, its crew waving at the station as they entered the docking bay. A young Velkari merchant sat down across from him. Trademaster, I have heard stories about the war, about what humans did. Are they true? Yulin took a sip of his drink and smiled. Which stories? All of them. The impossible victories. The refusal to surrender. The mercy they showed at the end. Is any of it true? Yulin set down his cup and looked at the young Valkyrie with ancient, knowing eyes. Let me tell you something about humans, young one. They are not the oldest species in the galaxy. They are not the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But they are something far more dangerous. What is that? Yulin watched the human freighter dock, its crew spilling out into the station, laughing and talking as if they had not just changed the course of galactic history. They are the species that refuses to die. And that, young one, makes them the deadliest species of all. The young Valkyrie looked at the humans with new eyes. And somewhere in his mind, a lesson was learned that would echo through generations. Never underestimate humanity. They survive.